When young people are in distress, they can sometimes do things that can be shocking or scary for parents, for teachers, for carers, and other people who look after or work with or love young people. These times can be really stressful, really challenging. How do you deal with these difficult and distressing behaviours? What should you say? What should you do? As a GP for almost 20 years working with young people, particularly in the university age group, I saw thousands of young people with mental health problems. And it was very common for them to come when they were at their wits' end and they didn't know where else to go, and talk about some of these difficult coping behaviours and strategies that they had found to help them through difficult times. And some of these strategies and behaviours were healthy. They were talking to people or therapy or exercise. And some of them were less healthy. They helped them, but they weren't always the best way forward. So some of them would drink or use drugs to numb the pain that they were in. Some of them would self-harm to distract themselves. Others would use things like gaming online or gambling online and develop addictions to escape the pain that they were in. And some of them would use food, either too much or too little, to try and counter the feelings that they were having and cope with the problems that they were having. We know that anyone at any age can do these behaviours, but there's something about when it's young people, when it's children, that makes us feel perhaps particularly helpless. And what I want to talk about today is what we can all do to help young people when they feel like this, to know what to say and how to react in a way that is supportive and helpful, and help that young person take the next step in their journey in trying to recover and move forward. Now, when someone we care about, and when we realize they're doing something that is harmful to themselves, maybe self-sabotaging, self-harm, cutting, drinking too much, all of these behaviors, it can be really normal and really easy, if you like, to focus on what they are doing, on the what of their behavior. We focus on what they've chosen to do, what the risks are, what the long-term consequences might be, and we can get very fixated and spend a lot of time looking at the behavior itself. But actually, what we need to be doing is focusing on the why this feels like the right thing for them to do, why they have chosen this activity, this behavior, this coping strategy. We need to get underneath the behavior itself and get to the why. Understanding these difficult behaviors, if you yourself, for example, haven't been through those feelings, can be really difficult. So one of the analogies that I tend to use is the boiling pot analogy. So when people use self-harm, for example, it's the emotional equivalent of taking the lid off a boiling pan of water. There's an immediate release, a release of pressure, a feeling of relief, a dissipation. It may be temporary, but there's a feeling that things are better. If we try and say to somebody, don't do that, stop that behavior, it's the equivalent of putting the lid back on, pressing it down, containing the pressure. But unfortunately, we know what happens when the pressure builds up inside a boiling pot. It can blow. And so actually what we should be trying to look at, and what I hope to talk about today, is looking at how we stop people getting to boiling point, how we go behind the behavior to understand why they're doing it, what's happening for them. Another way to phrase this, if you're going to be having a difficult conversation with someone, if you're going to try and talk to somebody about these sorts of things, is to think about this question and ask them this question. What is the problem that this behaviour feels like the solution to? What is it you're trying to solve, escape from, or numb by doing this behaviour? And that can help them to understand what you're trying to do. When we talk about these sorts of topics, which are really delicate, really difficult, we want to be able to have open conversations. But to do that, we need to build trust. We need to be kind, empathic, and compassionate. And I think there's sometimes a bit of a myth that you can somehow be too kind or too compassionate, and that is what it is. It's a myth. You can't be too compassionate in these circumstances. You need to build that trust, build that relationship. It may take time. It may be that you have an initial conversation, but then you come back to it later. But the reason it takes time is because people feel very worried about being judged. So they worry that they'll come and talk to somebody and they will be dismissed or not believed. Oh, it's not that bad. You don't need to do that. Or they'll feel that even GPs, I would see lots of students who say, well, I have come to see you, but it's a sort of last resort. Because they were worried that even I, professionally trained counsellors and other GPs, would judge them. And so it's really important to make it very clear that you're ready to talk to them, you're ready to listen when they feel ready. It can really help just to think for a moment about those particular behaviours and what is going on behind them. So I just want to recap, because it can be really difficult if you've never felt like that or you've never sort of had an addiction or so on, to sort of wonder why people do that. For example, self-harm, so physically harming yourself, can be a really important distraction from emotional pain, using physical pain. It's not the only reason, but it's one of them. Some people think about suicide, and they think about this because they feel that they are letting people down, that they're a failure in some way. Again, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the common ones among young people. They maybe drink or take drugs, and they do that. It can be to numb their feelings, but it can also be to feel something, anything. So, for example, they use it to numb feelings of social anxiety. If they're very worried about meeting people or feeling shy and going to parties or going into lectures, so they start to drink to get through it. And they use food, and they often starve themselves because it is the one thing that they can control. So often eating issues are nothing to do with food. They're to do with the control that they're trying to take back over their life. And if we get fixated on the what, on the food, and they're not eating, and we say just eat a bit more, we're missing the point completely. So that's why it's so important to understand the behaviours and get behind them, so that we can understand that it's actually about the social anxiety or the lack of control, rather than the alcohol itself. So this maybe starts to explain why, when we're dealing with these difficult behaviours, and it is so tempting to just say, stop, don't do that, please, for my sake, those sorts of comments are really common and understandable. But if we say that, it's putting that lid back on the boiling pan, and it's not understanding the why of the behaviour. It's not getting underneath the behaviour. So whilst obviously if there is immediate danger, physical danger, it's important to deal with that. With most of these behaviours, it is so important to understand why they're using the coping strategy and look at that as the way forward, how to move away from it, how to find another way to cope, a healthier way. Now, I say this because it is so important to be blatant about how we say that we're around, we're available. A lot of people think, well, you know, that young person, my child and so on, they can talk to me if they need to. We have a good relationship. They feel that it's sort of almost unspoken, or that they've said, you know, you can talk to me about anything. But actually, for young people, I think it's so important to spell it out, to be absolutely clear, to say something along the lines of, there is nothing that you could say or do that I wouldn't want to hear about, that I wouldn't want to talk to you about, that I wouldn't listen to, and that I would try and help you with. And I say that because I have seen, as I said, thousands of students over the years, and many of them come in and I say, have you talked to your family about this? And they say, well, I can't. I say, well, do you not talk to them? Do you not have a good relationship? Oh, no, I have a good relationship, but I'm worried I'll be letting them down. I don't want to worry them. So they don't talk. And yet the parents, the families at home, the carers think, we have a good relationship. They'll tell me if something is wrong. And so that's why my message today is about really spelling it out. That is the one thing that I hope you will take home, because it is such a common scenario to hear, but they never said anything, and they can talk to me when something goes wrong. I never realized there was a problem. We need to spell it out and be blatant about our support. So this is my last slide, because this is the message, I suppose, that hopefully encapsulates what is a really difficult topic. What young people need from us is for us to listen to them. They need us to listen, they need to talk, and we need not to interrupt. We need to believe them. We may be the first person to believe them. We may be the first person they've told, and they worry a lot about being dismissed or not believed. So it is really important to say, I believe you. And actually, we need to give them hope that we will help them, but even if we don't know how to sort this out, there are options. There are people we can go to. There is someone else we can help them to get to. So we will help them, and we have to give that hope, because people need hope when they're feeling very desperate. And if we do these three things, if we listen, if we believe, and if we can give hope, then we will start to understand the why of those behaviours and help those young people. Thank you.